More than 90 Tomahawk cruise missiles tore across the Pacific at 550 miles per hour, each armed with a 1,000-pound warhead. One after another, they slammed into China's coastal airfields and hardened command bunkers before anyone could even call for help. It was April 3, 2025. China had just fired the first shot, certain that its sprawling kill network of HQ-9 missile batteries, squadrons of J-16 fighters, and a thick lattice of coastal radar could obliterate any weapon that dared approach Taiwan's territorial waters. What Beijing didn't know was that it had locked its sights on the wrong target. This wasn't a lone reconnaissance craft or a vulnerable patrol vessel. It was the USS Gerald R. Ford carrier strike group, an immense, nuclear-powered fortress at sea, generating over 300 megawatts of power and coordinating thousands of interceptors, stealth aircraft, and phased array sensors. Within just 72 hours, China had lost over $5.7 billion in military assets, watched its coastal defense grid crumble, and pulled its forces 200 miles inland. The shock was not just in their losses, but in the scale of their own miscalculation. So how did the battle unfold? And what message does it send to any nation daring to challenge American naval power? Stay with us if you value sharp, fact-driven military analysis. Subscribe, like this video, and share your thoughts below. It fuels us to dig even deeper. At 6:45 a.m. on April 3rd, Chinese early warning radars along the Fujian coast detected a large, high-signature formation pushing steadily through the Taiwan Strait less than 80 nautical miles from shore. Satellite imagery and radar returns suggested it was an advanced American unmanned system, possibly a sensor flotilla or stealth drone formation creeping dangerously close to their self-declared maritime boundary. Inside the PLA's Southern Theater Command, alarms sounded. Convinced this was an act of provocation meant to undermine Chinese sovereignty, senior generals ordered an immediate strike. Confident, bordering on arrogant in their layered defenses, they believed no foreign platform could survive their barrage. HQ-9B surface-to-air missiles, each with a 125-mile reach and radar homing seekers designed to hit stealthy targets, were readied along the coast. J-16 and J-11 fighters roared from inland bases, armed with place-to-15 air-to-air missiles boasting engagement ranges of over 120 miles, ready to carve the sky into lethal kill boxes. Near Xiamen and Shantou, Type 730C IWS turrets, each spewing 4,200 rounds per minute, locked their barrels toward the air corridors. By 6:52 a.m., the first wave of Chinese missiles lit up the dawn, streaking toward the radar returns they believed were vulnerable reconnaissance platforms. But here lay their fatal error. Those massive radar signatures weren't fragile drones, they were the ships of the USS Gerald R. Ford carrier strike group, the most powerful mobile strike formation on Earth. The Ford, driven by two A-1B nuclear reactors and bristling with SPY-6 phased array radars, linked its defenses with Aegis baseline 10 fire control aboard its escorting destroyers. They could coordinate hundreds of interceptors, electronic warfare jammers, and countermeasures in seconds. By firing without challenge or warning, China had unknowingly triggered a direct confrontation with the full might of the U.S. Navy, an adversary that had spent decades preparing for this exact war. And now, they were about to learn what that meant. As the first Chinese missiles tore through the upper atmosphere at Mach 4, the Gerald R. Ford's battle stations went hot. The reactors poured their 300-plus megawatts into the carrier's weapons, sensors, and catapults. The SPY-6 arrays tracked over 1,000 targets in real time. Alongside her, Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, each carrying 96 vertical launch cells, spun up their interceptors. The SM-6 missiles roared skyward, Mach 3, 5 and climbing, to kill incoming HQ-9 south in mid-course. The faster MACH for our IM-16 ESS miss punched out anything that slipped through the first line. Closer in, our IM-116 rolling airframe missiles weaved through the air in swarming patterns, guided by infrared and passive RF seekers. and at point-blank range, the Phalanx CIWS spun up 6-barrel Gatlings, spewing 4,500 depleted uranium rounds per minute, turning the sky into a wall of tracer fire. Above it all, the Ford's flight deck roared to life. F-35C Lightning IIs, each packing nearly 18,000 pounds of precision munitions, launched into a battle that would decide the next 72 hours. Munitions roared into the sky on afterburner, climbing high to carve out a kill zone far from the carrier group. Above them, E-to-D advanced Hawkeyes circled like predators, sweeping the battle space with ultra-long-range AESA radar and feeding a constant stream of targeting data to pilots and the shipboard combat information centers. The Chinese barrage was fierce, but America's layered defenses shredded or deceived most of it. A few missiles exploded close enough to slam brutal shockwaves across the Ford's flight deck, rattling both crew and parked aircraft. But within minutes, the strike group locked itself back into formation, shielded by an iron wall of steel, sensors, and electronic warfare. What Beijing had envisioned as a quick, humiliating lesson in sovereignty enforcement instead collided head-on with the most advanced maritime defense grid ever built, or multi-tiered war machine blending space assets, stealth fighters, surface combatants, and point defense guns into one lethal organism. And for China, the nightmare was only beginning. Are you still with us? Because what happened next rewrote the playbook on modern warfare. The cost of China's reckless gamble became brutally clear almost instantly. Their HQ-29 and Place 15 missiles fizzled against the US multi-layered shield, and the tables turned with chilling speed. High above the strait, F-35C Lightning IIs, protected by E-to-D oversight, locked onto waves of Chinese J-16 and J-11 fighters, many still clawing for altitude from airfields near Xiamen and Shantou. Using targeting data from SPY-6 radars and satellite uplinks, the F-35Cs unleashed volleys of AIM-1 to ODM ROMs each, with a range of over 90 miles and active radar homing that left enemy pilots almost no room to maneuver. Seconds later, blossoms of flame lit the sky as dozens of $70 million fighters spiraled into the sea or disintegrated midair, sending shockwaves through PLA command bunkers. Desperate to regain control, China's Type 05 for a frigate pushed forward, deploying HQ-16 surface-to-air systems to form overlapping kill zones offshore. The attempt unraveled almost immediately. US EA-18G Growlers jammed their fire control frequencies, and AGM-88 HARM missiles screamed in at Mach 2, zeroing in on the unmistakable emissions of Chinese radar. One by one, frigate sensor masts erupted into molten wreckage. Onshore, coastal SAM batteries that had fired the first salvos now faced surgical retribution. From over 30,000 feet, A-18 Super Hornets released JDAME, or glide bombs, guided by encrypted GPS and inertial navigation. Two within a 30-foot impact circle, hardened radar bunkers crumbled like plaster under the force of the explosions. By the time the dust settled, China had lost more than 20 modern fighters, suffered crippling damage to at least 3 major naval vessels, and watched entire coastal defense sectors go dark. The financial loss was measured in billions, but the psychological blow was even greater. The myth of China's anti-access kill web capable of denying US forces anywhere near Taiwan was reduced to wreckage and oily smoke in under an hour. Beijing's gamble hadn't just failed, it had detonated in its face, triggering an American counteroffensive of staggering precision. Within an hour of the first Chinese strike, the US carrier strike group shifted from survival to overwhelming retaliation. Inside the USS Gerald R. Ford's Combat Direction Center, terabytes of real-time data flowed from satellites, P-8 Poseidons, and forward-deployed F-35Cs, compiling a merciless strike matrix. Orders went out 5 minutes later. Steel hatches slammed open across nearby destroyers and submarines. Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, each with 96 vertical launch cells, spat ripple after ripple of Tomahawk block for cruise missiles, skimming the sea at 550 miles per hour with 1,000-pound warheads. Using terrain contour mapping, they slipped under Chinese radar nets with ghost-like ease. In less than 10 minutes, nearly 90 Tomahawks were screaming eastward, their white contrails weaving across the horizon below the waves of Virginia-class. Nuclear attack submarine added its own spread of UGM-109s, fired from positions China's anti-submarine patrols had never detected. The dual-axis assault swamped what remained of PLA coastal tracking systems. When the missiles arrived, they didn't just crater runways, they struck command bunkers, long-range radar hubs, and hardened missile magazines in precise sequence, collapsing the defensive grid like a house of cards. In under 25 minutes, more than 15 major military installations were gutted or erased entirely. Overhead, the air war, the battle intensified. A-18 Super Hornets, armed with extended-range JDAMs and high-speed anti-radiation missiles, roared in at 30,000 feet, striking from well beyond the reach of what little remained of China's coastal air defenses. Each aircraft carried nearly 17,000 pounds of mixed ordnance, unleashing rolling shockwaves that tore through radar arrays, shattered bunker entrances, and left coastal fortifications in flames. Supporting them, EA-18G Growlers flooded the battle space with electronic warfare, jamming what was left of Chinese communication networks and injecting chaos deep into the PLAS command structure. Secure voice orders from inland bases never reached forward-deployed missile batteries. By the time local commanders realized they'd been cut off, their launchers were already burning wreckage. Through it all, the carrier strike group never let its guard drop. As PY-6 radars aboard the USS Gerald R. Ford scanned relentlessly for retaliatory strikes, feeding targeting data to SM-6 Interceptor's missiles capable of hitting threats over 230 miles away at speeds topping Mach 3.5. Closer in, Phalanx CIWS cannons stood ready for last-ditch defense, their rapid-fire mechanical growl cutting through the air whenever a threat appeared. In less than 2 hours, China's much-touted anti-access shield was shattered. The multi-billion-dollar strategy boasted about for years in white papers and state media, promising to keep American carriers thousands of miles from Taiwan, was gutted in less time than it takes to play a Major League Baseball doubleheader. On the USS Ford, there was no victory cheer, no triumphant speeches, only the cold, professional acknowledgement that decades of U.S. doctrine, training, and investment had proven themselves in combat. The strike group had dismantled a peer adversary's coastal fortress with breathtaking speed and near-total immunity. For China, the lesson was written in every smoking radar mast and cratered airfield along its southeastern coastline. By dawn on April 5th, just 48 hours after Beijing's rash decision to fire the first shot, the devastation was undeniable. Satellite imagery from both US and neutral commercial providers showed a grim mosaic of blackened runways, collapsed radar domes, and burned-out SAM batteries stretching nearly 300 miles along the shore. Intelligence estimates painted an even harsher picture. Over 40 modern fighters J-16s and J-11s worth more than $7 billion destroyed on the ground or shot from the sky by AIM-120D air-to-air missiles. At least 5 long-range HQ-9 SAM battalions, each valued at hundreds of millions, reduced to twisted wreckage, their scorched missile tubes angled uselessly toward the clouds. More than 15 major military facilities, from hardened ammo depots to sprawling fuel farms and command posts, obliterated or rendered inoperable. For the PLA, it meant years of rebuilding, untold billions in replacement costs, and a deep strategic humiliation. Surviving air defense units retreated over 200 miles inland, effectively conceding the entire coastline to U.S. air and naval dominance. Civilian ports along the shore went dark under blackout orders, terrified that even a flicker of radar emissions could draw another strike. In Beijing's highest war councils, the atmosphere shifted from bluster to dread. The so-called kill web that state media had hailed as a carrier killer had been exposed as fragile and hollow. What was meant to be a quick, decisive act of sovereignty enforcement had instead triggered a calibrated, devastating American counteroffensive one that erased decades of military investment in under 72 hours. The message was as sharp as it was unmistakable: firing on the American flag, especially against a nuclear-powered carrier group, is not a limited gamble. It is wagering your billion-dollar weapon systems, your best pilots, your coastal security, and the credibility of your national deterrent. From Fujian to Guangdong, every cratered runway and gutted bunker was proof of the cost of that gamble. In less than 3 days, Beijing's attempt to impose control over its maritime backyard had become an object lesson in modern naval warfare. Chinese leaders, trusting in layered missile grids and long-range fighters, had believed they could humble an American task force. Instead, they watched their hardware vaporize, their defenses collapse, and their strategic aura dim on the global stage. For the United States, the operation was a clinical validation of decades of investment-layered carrier defenses, long-range strike systems, and flawless joint targeting. No boasts, no grandstanding, just proof that when directly challenged, American sea power can dismantle an entire anti-access strategy in under 72 hours. The clash left more than debris and burning fuel. It carved a warning into the strategic consciousness of the Pacific: if you gamble on striking at the heart of American power, you risk losing not just ships or aircraft, but the very credibility of your deterrent. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe to help us bring you more deep dive coverage of the world's most critical flashpoints.